What is a drug? You might imagine Nancy Reagan's Just Say No ads, tie-dye, withdrawals. When exposed to anti-drug propaganda, it's easy to generalize and even demonize drugs. But with so many substances, how can we pin down a single definition for what drugs are? Think about it. Caffeine, alcohol, Prozac, cannabis, Xanax, Advil, birth control, whatever. Aren't we all on drugs? We can't say that all drugs are bad. And we certainly can't define drugs based on their legal status. That should work the other way around. But if we were to generalize, we can say that a drug is a substance that alters the body's function physically, psychologically, or both. So what makes a drug good or bad? Good and bad drugs are defined by two things: the potential for harm and abuse, and social stigma. A stigma is a negative association we have that develops over time, and eventually we forget the reasons. It's what lumps medically and spiritually useful drugs together with some pretty bad stuff. In the 1950s and 60s, a growing counterculture challenged the motives and authority of the US government, particularly surrounding war. This culture was associated with drug use. Psychedelics became synonymous with delinquency, violence, self-harm, insanity, rebellion, hippie stuff. The protests and anarchy in this movement threatened the expectations and order in society. And so naturally enough, this quickly led to the war on drugs. Drug research was canceled, and thus arose regulations. The CDSA is used to determine how and why controlled substances are regulated. The why? To allow access for lawful purposes and to reduce the risk of use for illegal purposes. The how? By classifying controlled substances in schedules based on their potential for harm and abuse to oneself and others. So what does harm mean? Online peer-reviewed journal The Lancet defines harm using a combination of 16 factors, including drug-specific or related mortality, loss of relationships or tangibles, impairment, crime, dependence, injury, and so on. So what about dependency and impairment makes a substance illegal? Impairment implies we lose some normal function. Understandably, a loss of function could be dangerous, but in supervised settings, is impairment a threat to society, self, or property? Next, dependency. We depend on drugs, among other things, every day to help with functions that our bodies should but sometimes can't perform. Think blood thinners, insulin, painkillers, puffers, and laxatives. Do these drug dependencies make us drug addicts? Certain buzzwords sound scary and threatening, but on the basis of harm, especially regarding injury, family adversary, and economic costs, the most dangerous drug is legal and available for purchase. It's alcohol. The least dangerous? Magic mushrooms, condemned for drug-specific impairment of mental functioning. Magic mushrooms and other psychedelic substances have an incredibly rich history in healing ceremonies, as well as medical research in treating addiction, pain, depression, trauma, and anxiety. However, there are currently no approved therapeutic products containing psilocybin in Canada. So based on our history with drugs, is it possible that psychedelics just got a bad rap? And is it worth it to ignore breakthroughs in medical science for decades and decades while throwing heaps of money at drug enforcement and incarceration? The cannabis industry's ability to overcome stigma and re-enter the market both medically and recreationally is enough to question the practicality of our drug rankings. After all, alcohol too was once illegal, yet that changed without an inkling of medical or therapeutic basis. Of course, alcohol's legality is not the reason for this video, and it shouldn't infer that anything else should be legal. Instead, we must look to the research into the therapeutic uses for psychedelics in order to achieve medical recognition.